Hi everyone, this is Norman Kochannek with post-Australia India Blues here in Sydney, in Australia, and we've got obviously Chris Vernon looking like he's a combination of is it like a pineapple with a pink pineapple? What's going on there?
Pineapples. I just thought, it's a pretty gloomy, it's a horrific day in England today. So I thought I'd just spice up a bit, maybe try a bit of exotic flair today to match the level of conversation.
Sounds wonderful. Well, it's good. Another episode of an Aussie and the POM talking all things India. In fact, it's going to go beyond that now. Now that we've moved from India series, we'll be talking about a lot of other series as well. Just briefly, Chris and I were talking before. India have headed home at 5:30 today our time, which is some 6 hours ago, roughly 5.5, 6 hours ago. They've headed off to back to India quite successfully. So India are going back to prepare for the upcoming India-England series, which starts on February the 5th. Amazingly, though, England is still playing cricket in Sri Lanka, and they're playing a match on Friday on the 22nd of this month, and they'll be going through the 22nd, 23rd, 25th, 26th of January. Effectively, within a week, they'll be starting, or just on a week, they're going to be starting a test match in India against India, which I'm a little bit shocked about when I think of the COVID-19 rules here in Australia, where you enter Australia, you've got 2 weeks lockdown without a shadow of a doubt. It appears as though between countries like Sri Lanka and India, it's somewhat more lax, where there's not that 2-week quarantine going on. Chris, you were saying that in England, depending on what country, they would normally have a 2-week quarantining as well, correct?
Yeah, so over the summer, I know that Pakistan and the West Indies sides had to quarantine for 2 weeks in an ISO bubble, we call it here. I don't know if it's the same over there, just literally hotel bound for 2 weeks. And then depending on the infection rates of COVID and case numbers and deaths, there are countries on a no-fly list here. So, I went to Turkey for a week in the summer, and I didn't have to quarantine when I went back, but if I went to Spain or Croatia or Portugal, I would have had to have quarantined because the cases were worse there. So it's a bit all over the place, really, isn't it?
Well, it doesn't make any sense, to be really honest with you. I mean, to me, once you're at an airport, you're mixed with all sorts of people, regardless of where you have been. So that throws it out the window. All right, so let's go through it for all our viewers. We'll have a Sri Lanka England test, the second test, starting on Friday, which will be very interesting because I'm guessing Dimuth Karunaratne will be returning to the side. Sri Lanka will be bolstered by having their captain back, which will be quite significant. That game will take place. As I actually announced earlier, well, it was well and truly earlier, the announcement of the Indian squad, which has Virat Kohli back as captain, Rahane back to vice captain, no Jadeja, no Shami, there's no Umesh Yadav, but Bumrah and Ashwin are in the squad, which implies that they're a reasonable fitness level. And the Indian bowlers will be quite interesting because they've got so many good players in there now that just won a magnificent test match. How could you drop them? Washington Sundar, Shardul Thakur, Mohammad Siraj. How could you drop these guys? They played so well. That's another thing. So I'll go back. So again, England's Sri Lanka this Friday. India and England on February the 5th. We've got a current test series that I've just come to notice about Pakistan versus South Africa on the 26th of January, a 2-test series. So there's effectively 3 series right there. And then on top of that, Australia are going to South Africa in February as well. So our Indian viewers will be thinking, the Blues about this test series being over yesterday and having withdrawal symptoms. Don't fear, you'll have plenty of cricket on your shores very soon, and plenty to watch around the world, and plenty for us, both Chris and I, to update you on, certainly. So that's where we're at. The Indian squad is extremely strong, and I think that if Pant bats the way he did on the fifth day of the test, England are in a bit of trouble. I mean, I'm just being flippant, of course, but who knows? So, Chris, you and I have decided we're going to talk about 3 areas today. Obviously, we have to talk about the Australia-Indian series. That end to it was a crescendo beyond crescendos. I talked earlier today on my report to the viewers about the newspapers in Australia and what they had on the front pages. Now, and I'll bring it up again. This is the Financial Review. The Financial Review, I don't know what it's like in England. I'm sure it's the same. They don't even go near sport on the front page, not on the back page or middle page. It's nowhere. But in this particular edition of this morning, it's on the front page, which is remarkable. And I don't think it's a matter of being a slow day, but the photo of Rishabh Pant being hugged by half the team was amazing. It really affected Australia. All our newspapers have been full on with commentary. It's been a disaster in terms of Australia because we don't know where to turn now. Our captain, Tim Payne, is not captaining the way we'd like him to, so there's been issues. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. Then secondly, about the Sri Lanka-England test match, the second one, which is starting on Friday. And then we've got two more. You wanted to bring up, didn't you, Chris, a question from a viewer you were saying?
Yeah, so we've had quite a few questions coming in, and one of the guys who's sort of been interacting a lot with both of us on Twitter as well, and is Akshab Giri Haradas. He asked us the next question about grassroots cricket, about when he was growing up and seeing kids in India, playing in the gullies and the streets, just being absolutely cricket mad. And he just wanted to sort of touch on what it's like in Australia and England. What's the grassroots level and what are kids doing about it. So quite an interesting question that. And then I thought, lastly, after that, we could, after our opening batting discussion, which was probably fairly straightforward, wasn't it, the other day with who the candidates were. But I think moving on to sort of the 3, 4, 5 position, there's a slightly more interesting topic and possibly more of a heated discussion that might get, especially sort of our Indian fans sort of commenting who they think should be in there, because obviously there's one fairly obvious name that we're going to be talking about there. So
I think he'll be given quite a berth.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there are our 4 points. Australia-India series was just being completed. The England-Sri Lanka series. Then on to the question from our viewers. And then fourthly, the whole batting positions of 3, 4, 5, who in the world should be filling those positions in our so-called perfect test team. All right, let's start with the first point. And that is Australia versus India. Having expressed my thoughts on India winning days ago, and some people were poo-pooing and saying it's not going to happen. I'm very smug tonight because I predicted it and I was right. And really, it was an enchanting victory. And there's some classic comments. I mean, there's one of the headlines here, punt on fire. Like Australia's been pantsed, which is to embarrass them, like taking their pants down. Yeah. I think that's quite funny. But that's very appropriate. A bit cliche, that's true. But I had one that I think there was the one from Gideon Haig. He's an amazing, eloquent writer here in Australia. He said, posterity wins a great day of Test cricket. And that's pretty true. It's a very apt way of looking at it. And to me, India has to go down as having had their best fairy tale Test series in the entire history of Indian cricket. Okay, they've won 2 amazing World Cups, but this has to go down as one of the most amazing away wins against all odds, having had 9 of their players out, barely 2 that played all 4 tests. You can't have that happen and expect to win. And I think we talked about it before. Imagine if Australia lost all their bowling attack and a keeper and their captain. We would have been thrashed.
Yeah.
Same with England, for that matter, as well. Quite an incredible result. And the papers here have gone crazy, lauding over in India, supporting them, saying how good they were, and disparagingly about Tim Payne, without a doubt. And probably Wade certainly doesn't look much good, but really the whole team was down. Our bowling attack was Stark and Lyon were fairly ineffective. It was only really Cummins who won player of the series, and Hazelwood did very well. And of course, I don't quite get how Cummins is player of the series, though, when India had several players that probably, if they were in the team long enough, would have been given that position. Rahane would have been close to me, based on his captaincy alone. Streets ahead of what Payne did. So ultimately, India won the series 2-1. Clearly, they didn't just regain the Border Gavaskar Trophy; they actually won it hands down, convincingly. They've got both hands on it for a good period of time, if you ask me. Australia will struggle to beat them at home, and in Australia, we've lost 2 series against them. There's no guarantee they'll go close next time if they've got a full team. Heaven help if Kohli played. Seriously. So India, Punt in particular, was player of the match. Now, they do talk about Sachin Tendulkar being the best player of all time for India. Would be arguably the player. Certainly statistically, it's right. But how many games did Sachin Tendulkar actually win the way that Punt did with his 89? He wasn't known for that. Not saying he wasn't a great player, but he wasn't known to be a match winner, as Punt proved to be quite incredibly. The ability to score 89 and to be, they had, what was it? In the last 2 sessions, India had to get 245 runs. They were 1 for 83. No hope. After the next session, they scored 100 runs. They still had to get 145 in the last session of a test match on the 5th day with the ball doing all sorts of things. Who would have guessed that? 145. And they did it easily with a few overs to spare. No pressure at all, it seemed. They cruised to it. Punter was amazing. And it was just such a commanding performance. It really was. And I'm quite attracted to the way India played. Australia just had no idea, no answers, despite being Australia were at full strength. Other than Pekoski, Australia were at supposed full strength. At home on the Gabba Fortress for 32, 33 years. It didn't mean anything in the end. So that's my summation. What was your thoughts on that game?
I think I've seen people heralding it sort of as the best Test match series of all time. I'm reluctant to say that. I think that in terms of an underdog beating against the odds, I think without a doubt it's the greatest team performance ever to go and beat Australia there. I still think that in terms of matches played, the 2005 Ashes series was a better series in terms of the drama of the games, if that makes sense. Like, this series has been brilliant, but obviously the first test was a bit of a one-sided affair. There was obviously the draw. The test match that India won wasn't particularly close. So in terms of a series, I mean, the 2005 Ashes just had everything, didn't it? But in terms of a team performance and comeback sort of underdog against the odds, I think this has been brilliant. I don't think I saw a stat before the test that the Australian bowling lineup had 1,046 test wickets between them, and India's had 13. I doubt that there's ever been a test match played where there's been a greater difference in wickets between the two sides. And I watched the first session in a little bit. I stayed up. It'd be interesting to know, to be a fly on a wall in the Indian dressing room, if their plan was always to go for it, because Pujara came out and he was 8 off 87 at lunch or something, which I know in looking back and in hindsight he'll say, well, I set it up, I did, that I was the glue that allowed Pant and Gill to go for it. But Shubman Gill, who came out and just looked fantastic, didn't he? I mean, uppercut Stark for 6 last over before lunch. You just think, what's this guy doing? Like, are they trying to save this test? Because obviously Pujara was literally standing there just getting hit. He literally didn't have to have a bat for some of them. He just literally stood there and got pinned for a couple of hours. And I think that Gill and Pant will take a lot of the plaudits, and rightly so. But Pujara's innings of just balls and guts and courage to just stand there and just, he got hit on the helmet 3 times. He got hit on the finger. He got hit in the chest. He got hit. He got hit everywhere. And I think that just shows real courage, doesn't it?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, though. I think they did plan one thing. They planned to have Pujara at one end and the attacking batter at the other end. That was pretty clear. It even happened in the previous test, you would argue, with Ashwin and Vihari. They both were defensive, but Ashwin took the spin and Vihari took the fast bowling. You would argue that Pujara took the brunt of certainly Cummins and even Stark, and to an extent Hazelwood. And Punt and the rest of them were on the line very quickly, or even Labuschagne or whomever else was bowling, even Cameron Green. There was a distinct plan of yin and yang, one to attack, one to defend, and it worked brilliantly.
Which is why I thought it was interesting when Gill got out. I thought with Pujara sort of stonewalling at the other end that they might have sent Pant in then. And when they sent Rahane in, I thought, that's just them going to shut up shop now. I didn't think that they. And I think the commentators, I think it was Gilchrist on at the time, said, I would have sent, depending on who gets out, would determine who I sent in next. So if Gill had got out, I'd send Pant in to complement Pujara, and if the other way around, he'd have sent Rahane in. But I woke up, I fell asleep, and it was probably just after Rahane was in, and I woke up and seen India win, and I couldn't believe it. I guess just brilliant, really.
We went to script, really. I mean, we both agreed that Punt would go up the order, which he still did. He went up a position, or at least one, and with Argyle in the same mindset. Look, it was quite magnificent, really. And they seemed to have. Okay, when they lost a few wickets in that last session, it was an element of doubt. But Punt was always, in his mind, going to win that match. And he just took it by the scruff of the neck and didn't care. Labuschagne was at him with words, and even Payne was. I mean, Payne was the most embarrassing because he stupidly said after the third test, "Oh, can't wait to see it the Gabba to them," and that was that's bit him in the bottom big time. He looks like a fool. Yeah. He didn't back those words up at all. Anyway, magnificent series. Again, the words on the paper, Indian summer. The posterity point. There was some amazing commentary, like Series of the Ages. You have to admit it was right up there. That only tells me one thing. If you've talked about the England series, Ashes series being better, you're probably right. But the fact is that was 5 tests, wasn't it? This was 4. Imagine if they played a 5th test under these conditions. Yeah. What would have happened?
Yeah, I just think I was going on purely the closeness of the games. Like the Edgbaston was 2 runs, 1 run. The third test when Australia held out in the dark, 9 down. You then had the 4th test when we needed to chase 127 and got it 7 down, but it was in the balance. And I think just as obviously a 5 test series, I just think that this test series has been brilliant as an underdog, as nothing ever expected. But I think just the quality of the cricket in the 2005 and the games played was just, I don't think you'll ever get a better all-round series than that. But, I'm happy to be, I'm sure the comments will tell me I'm wrong in a bit. But
you're also on the winning end of it, aren't you, being an Englishman?
I think even from an Australian point of view, I think if you asked a lot of the people over there and the pundits, I think that a lot of people would agree that was a phenomenal series played by 2 teams, probably both very close to the peak of their powers in that respect.
Absolutely, no, I agree. But that only tells me one very clear message, that is Australia-Indian series in Australia, and probably in India, warrants 5 test matches.
Absolutely, I think it's ridiculous that any series, regardless of, I know why you play smaller, but Pakistan, South Africa, 2-match test series, England, Sri Lanka, 2-match test series, like you're playing in a world championship. Any test series between probably the 6 or 7 biggest nations in the world should be at least a 4 or 5 test match series. Like it's ridiculous.
And the India England series, the first 2 tests, we know that the teams have been selected for the first 2. But in total, how many tests are there?
4. I'm pretty sure it's 4. Okay. So it's a good series. I think it should be 5. I'm assuming, and it's just a shame that a lot of the test match series are probably calendared around or organised around 2020 World Cups, or the IPL's coming up. I think it's back at Easter time, isn't it? Late March, April time. So I get that's where the money is, but in terms of a fan, or Test match cricket's where it's at still, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And as I said, the heading of posterity wins a great Test match series was what we came up with. I think we've certainly given India the praise they deserve. Let's move on to the second point.
I think just the last thing, I think that it gives Australia a lot of thinking, looking ahead. I think that England will be sat there going, if that Indian side can go, and I think that Australia, especially at the Gabba, there's always been a sort of an attitude that we can't beat them. Everyone, I don't think anyone thinks they can beat them, but for that Indian side to go and to win there, I think that the Aussies would be worried or concerned that the POMs will be going out there thinking the same, and I think that it's going to be a tough series for Australia now. Especially with their full strength side. Greatest will in the world. That England side is as good as that Indian side that played in this series, I think, and it could be a very good, close Ashes series if something doesn't change from the Australians.
I agree. The reality is that Australia's got to rethink their captaincy, and that's where it starts and finishes for me. The bowling attack's pretty good. Lyon wasn't as good as he should be, but batting-wise, we're atrocious. We've only got really Labuschagne and Smith that we can, and when Warner's fit, and if Bukowski's fit, we've got 4 batters that we can rely on. We're still 2 down.
Bukowski's played 1 test, it's easy to say you can rely on, but you can't say you rely on someone after one test. Like
No,
Warner
if he gets injured and he's out of the next test, it's the same thing. You're right. But effectively, it's only really two then. You're right. Okay, so India deserving winners. They're back home, or they're starting their trek back home now. Be very relieved, I'm sure. Be good to play on home soil. Anyway, that was a great series. Now, Friday, England versus Sri Lanka in the second test. Jamuth Karunaratne, I believe, is definitely back on a Colombo set of pitches as opposed to Gore, which certainly was more bowler friendly, I would argue, especially for the first innings, as we saw Sri Lanka only get 135, I think it was. England, have they got Anderson? You said is not coming.
No, Anderson Torwood. I think that, and the second test is in Gaul as well. I'm pretty sure. I think they're both.
I thought it was moved to
venue.
Colombo.
Sorry, my mistake. Because of the COVID, maybe Gauls right down. Sort of, it's not as metropolitan, is it? It's a quieter sort of on the south tip, isn't it? So maybe it's
hardly quieter, but anyway.
But maybe geographically, why it's easier. It's easier for sides to play. I don't know. But Anderson Torwood, he's there. I think that this year, especially with all the subcontinent, Sri Lanka, India, I think that Broad and Anderson will just be rotated. I think that Broad, I don't know, there's not been a lot of team chat because I looked this morning from England's side of view. I personally think that Anderson will come in for Broad, and I think they'll play 2 tests each in India. I think they'll just rotate them, manage their workload for the summer with a view of the Ashes this winter. I don't think in India or Sri Lanka you'll see them playing in the same side much because I don't think that they need to, but I think they'll just rotate them. I think that's what, and I think although Broad bowled really well, the only thing is you could say, could you bring Anderson in for Curran? But I think they like Curran. He's a left armer. He offers something a little bit different with the bat. He's a bit of an X factor, really. He's a bit of a luxury player. So that's the only way you could see Anderson and Broad playing together because they want to play Wood because he's quick and he's different. So I don't know what the situation is with Moeen Ali. I think that he's been ruled out. I don't think that he can play. It'll be interesting to see if they give Wokes a game. But team-wise, I think the batting will stay. They might want to try and bring folks in, but you know what it's like with cricket momentum. Changing a side that's just fairly comfortably won a test match in Sri Lanka you don't want to be making 4 or 5 changes. So I think they might just rotate Anderson in for Broad and leave the rest as it is.
And of course, Archer and Stokes are gearing up for India more so, aren't they? And you got Anderson, as you said, rotating. So very strong, England, certainly. But I think Sri Lanka will put a better effort this time. I really do. I think they'll be better for that run with Karunaratne in charge. I think he is a good leader and strong leader, and he bats as an opener. He'll take charge more. I think their batting lineup was more effective in the second innings. Had they batted that way in the first, it would have been a closer match. And Root could have easily gotten out on certain occasions. So it would have been a different match. I think Sri Lanka won't be pushovers the second test, put it that way.
Yeah, agreed. There's a lot of pride that Sri Lanka. England won 5 tests in a row in Sri Lanka now. We obviously won this test. We won 3-0 a couple of years ago, and we went out there and we won the last test in Kandy, I think it was in the 2013-14. So there's a lot to prove for Sri Lanka. They won't want an England side that is a fairly inexperienced England side, especially on the batting, to go out and, the last 4 tests, especially this test and the 3-0 we won, we've won really quite comfortably in every time. It's not been, I know there was a bit of a wobble chasing 14, 10 for 3 or something, but it was never really in doubt, and it was never it wasn't particularly close is what I'm saying.
No. And Mickey Arthur's a damn good coach in my opinion. The former South African, former Pakistan, who else has he coached? Australia at one stage.
Yeah.
Quite a homework gate we had in India at one stage with him involved. With Shane Watson playing up. It's a long story, but Mickey Arthur's pretty good. I think he's mentally going to get this Sri Lanka team right. It'll be a lot closer match, which is good for England as well, I think.
Yeah, no, I think we're obviously gearing up for the India series, and we want to test. It'll be interesting to see what India go with the side. I think that they'll want to play Washington Sundar, especially. I don't think that the seamer is as much of a going to play Bumrah. I don't know if Ishant Sharma's fit, but
he's in the squad.
That series comes down to the spin bowlers and the batting. I don't, and I'll be slated for in the comments. I don't think that there's much difference in the seam attacks. I think Brummer's obviously probably the standout, but the other seamers, Natarajan,
well, he's
Fakoi,
not. Natarajan's not in the squad. Siraj is.
Siraj, yeah.
Yadav and Sami are both out, and on top of that, Jalesh is also out for the first two tests. They're quite depleted.
It comes down to which spinners bowl better, and Ashwin's going to be the favourite to bowl better, and how the batting goes. India won't out bowl us in the seam department, I don't think.
No, not necessarily.
You've got better spinners. It'll be interesting to see what spinners India go with. England historically have had a lot of left-handers, so would suit Ashwin and maybe Sundar playing, but obviously Stokes will come back in. There's a more top heavy in the right-hander spot, so I don't think they'll want to play two off spinners. I don't think that Sundar is a massive spinner of the ball, so they might want to go with Kuldeep, who's the Chinaman, just offers something different to the right-handers England have got.
Well, surprisingly, he wasn't used in the Australian Test series at all, which, okay, they won the series and won it well in the end. They didn't need him, but you could have argued for his place to be there.
I think he's more of an attacking bowler, isn't he? In India, he's a true second spinner. Typically, English or the Indians going to Australia or a Test match series in England, if you're going to play one spinner, you want a spinner that can just tie and end up. You don't want going at 4-5 and over. And Kuldeep he goes for runs. You want Sundar or a Graham Swan did it well, or a Ashwin bowling 25 overs for 60, not 25 overs 3 for 140. So
no, that's true. No, but it's going to be interesting. And look, I'm first of all wanting to see England play against Sri Lanka. Now, the Pakistan-South Africa match, we won't talk about it today, but we'll probably look into that a bit later as well. Yeah. That'll be interesting. The South African side, a different makeup these days, but the Pakistan got a few new. They got Harris Ralph, who's a very good fast bowler. I'm very keen to see him play at Test level. I think he's got the goods. That's just my thoughts. Having had something to do with him in Australia when he was here, there were 4 paces that were here at one stage, and I had a lot to do with Harris Ralph. I think a lot of the kid, and he's proven in the big bash here that he's done very well. Took several fifers. He's a Test quality bowler if given the chance. All right, let's move on to your third point, the viewer's question.
Yeah, perfect. So as I said, we touched on it earlier. Grassroots cricket. I think that it's an interesting topic here, and it's something that I think it, depending on what levels of where you're at, everything taking into account, and the question comes from saying from an Indian perspective that it's still gully cricket and street cricket, and there was a picture in Sri Lanka where the ground next door, there's a bit of dirt or grassland next door to the ground, and there were people just playing cricket on there. So I mean, what's it like? What's the grassroots sort of setup like in Australia, and how does it compare maybe to here, and what chances do kids have, and everything like that?
Well, there's 2 negatives to start with. Our so-called Sheffield Shield, our county version of cricket, has gone to pot, so to speak. It's completely shut down because of COVID. There's been very little of that play. There was a couple of games played earlier with Bukowski and Harris got double centuries, but there's been nothing since. Grade cricket has been very intermittent. There's been a lot of stoppages there as well. But the biggest thrust in grassroots cricket in Australia is by far women's cricket. Women's cricket has taken on great gusto. There's teams coming out of our ears now. There's young girls playing in large numbers. Australia's done so well, especially in Sydney, where I'm from. There's a plethora of players and teams, and it seems to be a concentration on that. A little bit to the detriment of the men's cricket, to be really honest with you, because the sheer availability of grounds, when you have more teams playing, male or female, it does take up the ground space. And I would argue grassroots depends a lot on how well the Test team's going, or ODI and T20 side. And I don't think we're going as well as we should. There's certainly a lack of batters coming through. Bowlers we seem to be okay with, but batters, where are they? There's only a handful that are around at state level, and they don't. Kawaja should have been in the squad, he wasn't. Curtis Patterson was certainly another player. Jason Sanger's a player that I know should be in there as well. There's only a very small number. So we are lacking in men's grassroots cricket. Women's, certainly not. We're going through the roof. In fact, we're the strongest by a country mile. Other countries bring their girls to Australia. I know personally, because I manage about 20 of them. they all come to play in Sydney. It's the mecca of cricket. The women's cricket, like only this weekend, all the women's players who played the women's Big Bash, all of them were playing grassroots, let's call it grassroots grade cricket. All of them were, and they were lending a hand. They were teaching kids and girls, and it was incredibly strong.
Mm.
In fact, that's what men's cricket is not doing. None of the Test players or even state players go back to their grade teams and help grassroots as much as they should, I believe. I think that's gone away a little bit. It's quite sad. But definitely women's cricket's on the up and men's is, well, somewhat on the down. That's my summary.
Yeah, it's I think even going back to the sort of cutting it further back, I think that in this country, kids-wise, there's got, I think from when my dad was growing up and, cricket was on Freeview television, it was on the BBC, you could flick it on and it was on, and the money side and the corporate side of Sky, which is the Foxtel equivalent, is Sky Sports over here and BT Sport now. So the Test match series at the moment that just happened in Australia, India was on BT Sport over here, which is a separate paid for, you have to have a monthly subscription to watch it. So if you're a 10, 11-year-old kid who just loves his cricket, there's not much cricket on at all. Unless your parents can afford it to watch it or have it on as a bit of a luxury on the telly, you can't watch much cricket. And I think that when you talk about why aren't kids taking up cricket so much, it's because that it's not, you can't just put the telly on and watch it, and why is football so, and it's cricket can be quite an expensive thing to get into as well. And I know when you first start playing and coaching as well, I do a lot of cricket coaching and it's brilliant, but you see some kids who aren't necessarily from a privileged background, whether it be they're not a private school kid or just a normal, sometimes if the parents who are not massively well off, you go and buy a new kit, you're looking at a new bat, that's £200-400 for a good bat. Sometimes pads, 50-60 quid a helmet, boots, kit, and then if you want to then go and do some coaching as well, it's not like football where you can just pick up your brother's old pair of boots and a leather and a thing or a tennis ball and kick it about, So I think that needs to be addressed, and there is big steps going that way. England have got the 100 coming in this summer. I don't know if that's been publicised or talked about much in Australia, which I think it's a bit. I think from my level, where I'm a bit of a purist, if that makes sense, and I'm already in cricket, I don't think it's advertised for someone like me, because I think it's going to be on the BBC, it's going to be on free-to-air telly. I think that it's there to say to kids and to people, come and watch this, watch them whack it around everywhere. How great fun, colourful kits, got all crisp sponsors. I think going to be probably quite an exotic, glamorous sort of thing. And then all of a sudden the kids think, oh, that's brilliant. Then they watch the 2020 because England are playing. They think, oh, this is quite good. They go and play it at school with their friends and they go and watch the test. So I think it's a sort of a stepping stone in, if that makes sense, for kids to get into cricket, as opposed to thinking this is a long term. Or does that make sense?
Yeah. Is it a bit? I'm gathering from what you're saying. I was there, what is now more than a year ago, at an Ashes period, and I played cricket myself on an Ashes tour. Look, the reality is, I found it a bit gimmicky. We were lectured by the head of that particular tournament, and his name eludes me now, who's in charge of the 100. He's one of the players from the actual cricket board there, the ECB, and he was quite a young fellow, and he was talking quite competently, but he lost me. It sounded gimmicky. I'm sorry. Being a purist, I found it very gimmicky. So
it is. I agree, and I think that a couple of the rules that brought in on the Big Bash this year were just I don't get it. But no, back to it. I think it is a little bit gimmicky, but I think that it's intentionally meant to be different and it's meant to be quirky. It's 100. I think they've tailored the 100 to be like it is because they're under quite strict time frames on free-to-air telly. You have to fit it in a 3-hour time slot, and I think they've worked it out that this is a good way of making sure that happens.
So it's actually 25 ball overs, correct?
Yes.
And they bowl from one end for 10 and then the other end for another. So it's time restricting, so to speak. It's reducing our time needed.
It's meant to make sure that it fits into the telly slot. I think it is gimmicky, and I don't particularly. It's not something that a lot of people have their opinions on and said they wouldn't have it, and I think ultimately, if it gets kids and more people interested in playing cricket and liking cricket, then it has to be a good thing, surely.
Well, let's see. All right, so we can allow that. That's a pretty good answer to that that question, and I thank you for that question. Let's get some more questions, guys. Let's be challenged. Challenge Chris and I. I mean, I'm obviously an intellectual giant, and Chris is somewhat so. So we all want to be challenged. Of course, we're kidding. We're kidding. All right. Now, on to our fourth topic, which is basically around you lead the discussion, Chris.
Yeah, so we spoke about opening bats the other day in our test. I think we're going to go through our sort of current test side. Really, we're going to start the openers last week, go to the middle order. Then maybe next time we can discuss an all-rounder and a wicket-keeper, and then go into the bowlers from there. And it just something that we think might be interesting and engage sort of a debate.
We might get your sock. You got a sock hanger or something. We can tie it to your cupboard door behind you, and you can have the name slotted in nicely. But that could be a little thing you could do.
I'll get something.
Can you manufacture that? So
I'll have a look for sure. I'm not particularly gifted on the technology side or the artistic side, but I'll see what I can do. But yeah, so the numbers 3, 4, 5 this week. I don't know what your thoughts are, Norman. I think that there are 4 candidates for these 3 slots, and I've left out a couple that are probably should be recognised as well. But
do you think that the 3, 4, and 5 are specific to 3, 4, and 5, which means I'll pick an obvious player. Virat Kohli should only be 3, and that's it? Because that's often a question I find intriguing when a Steve Smith goes from 3 to 4, 4 to 3. I tend to not like that. I'm a purist, a traditionalist. I like a person to have a position and stay there.
I agree. I think that in these scenarios like this, I had Kohli at 4 in my team. So it's I think that my number 3 is I think that these slots are. I think if an opening bat, I think that's you open the bat or not. Like you can't say Steve Smith could open the batting in my favourite side, but I think these slots are potentially more sort of fluid, aren't they, in that respect? Okay. So who would you have? Who are your sort of candidates to sort of have a look at to start with?
Well, Virat Kohli has to be in there.
Yep.
Even though Ajinkya Rahani's been deputising very well, by far pure batting class is Virat Kohli. I've interviewed Doug Walters and Jeff Thompson. If you all are watching these shows, guys, viewers, you would have seen me talking to Jeff Thompson and Doug Walters, and they both openly on air and privately talk to me about the best, not only now but ever. They both Doug Walters and Jeff Thompson, and I respect them both from their history. They both said out and out Virat Kohli is the best batter in the world. Actually, both of them said in their minds, period. Forgetting Don Bradman for a moment, let's move him away, but they rated both Doug Walters and Jeff Thompson, Australian greats, both rated Virat Kohli able to hit the ball in all parts of the ground and had more of a match-winning ability than even the likes of Sachin Tendulkar. So Virat Kohli was certainly one that I'd have to pick at probably 4.
Well, I agree. I'm with you there. I think that he answered a lot of questions over his form. It came over a bit of a cloud when his overseas form, and I think he got 400s in the series in Australia last time, and he came to England having had Anderson literally looked like Kohli was batting with a snooker cue the first time he came over here. Literally didn't know about him, and he came over here clearly with the typical Virat Kohli sort of almost arrogance. You know, he was up for it, wasn't he? And he proved everyone wrong, and he had a great series. So I agree. I think Kohli is definitely in there at 4. Interesting when you talk about greatest batsman ever. I'm gonna definitely go against the grain, and I think that Kohli and Tendulkar are definitely right up there. I've got 2 sort of not left field but different opinions on who I think are the best 2 of all time. I think that when you talk about who's better between Tendulkar and Brian Lara, I think that purely from what you've touched on, Tendulkar scored more runs, scored more hundreds, but how many individual match winning performances could you name that Tendulkar made? It's difficult. If you said Brian Lara, I reckon you could reel off 7 or 8 matches where he won a game. 200 and he basically took Australia by himself. You could probably name 6 or 7 innings that he won a test match, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're agreeing with Kohli at 4. I'm going to slot him in there with you.
Yeah.
Now 3 and 5. Now at the moment in world cricket, you still have to go with Steve Smith in that that mix. Kane Williamson is certainly up there. Joe Root, despite his double 100, I'm afraid to say is not. Yeah. Why? Because his average shows that he's had a lot of, not failures, but lesser scores and has not converted well. Can score a big score, but I find he often does that against a weak attack, not necessarily against a good attack. And I believe the Sri Lankan attack where he's got his double 100, they were pretty ordinary. So,
I agree with you. I agree, Steve Smith. I think that it's just a no-brainer. He goes into 5 for me. He bats. I think him and Kohli are 4 and 5. Without a doubt, I don't think there's any debate. I think that the number 3 spot, I think Kane Williamson has it at the moment. I've got his stats up. 24 Test hundreds at 52. 7,000 runs. It's him or Joe Root for me. I think that Babar Azam is another name that we can't really forget, or Marnus Labuschagne. There's so many guys out there at the moment. Faf du Plessis. There's a lot of good cricketers, but I think that
just a little segue. While we're talking, I've just had a comment made by Viv Richards' brother Merv Richards. Just a bit of a tidbitty thing. A bit of an aside. On my screen, I've said Merv Richards.
The name drop, yeah.
Yeah, I'm name dropping this. Okay, all right. Look, I agree with you. I mean, the order, you can mix and match those 3, but they're the 3 for sure. And you can't leave one of them out. They have to all be fitted in. But then you've got the Rock Pujara. I mean, he's by no means the best batsman in the world or one of the top batsmen in the world. But if you had to pick a team, you might pick him first purely because of the need to have him there when the chips are down. I think that if you had to bat someone for 100 overs to survive an innings against bowling, it was all over the place, I would probably pick him over those 3 we just mentioned. To be honest with you, as he's proven in the Test match. But yeah, I agree with you totally. But we'll get the responses. So that's an obvious, well, not obvious, but they're the 3. But no, Joe.
Yeah, I'm torn between Williamson and Root. I think that Williamson's overseas record, from what I was looking at, averages in the 20s in Sri Lanka and South Africa, averages 30 in England, averages well in Australia. Joe Root's, I think, of the 3 of them, quickest to 7,000 Test runs. And at his age, Joe Root still, even though he doesn't convert as much, averages 49 in Test cricket of 18 Test hundreds. I think I'm torn. I'm obviously got a slight English bias, and I think Joe Root is brilliant. And it's Kohli 4, Smith 5, and then it's Williamson or Root for 3. I can't really pick between them, if I'm honest.
Okay. All right. I mean, the way Rishabh Pant's batting at the moment, not that he's 3 or 4, but my gosh, if he keeps going the way he's going, I'd have him at 5 because of the way he won that game was quite phenomenal.
I don't think he's technically good enough to be batting at 5.
Probably not.
I think that on a flat wicket in India, maybe. I don't think if he came in at 15 for 3 at Trent Bridge when Stuart Broad and James Anderson are swinging about, I think technically he wouldn't. And that's the same for a lot of the Indian or subcontinent or Australian batsmen. The technique wise, I think if you're picking a 6 or a 7, I think that Pant is. Well, when we did the keeper next week, he's going to be one of the names in there for sure. So. I don't think he's a top 5. I think that in a match scenario like on the one just gone or at Sydney, then you can argue that he could come in as a horses for courses on the day. But I don't think you want to be picking a side where I think you're batting light if Rishabh Pant's batting at 5 is what I'm saying.
Okay, I tend to agree. All right, we've talked well today, and I think there's a great response from the questions, and we've got some good thoughts. But I'm expecting you to do some homework, Chris. I want the batters' names up on your wall behind you. We're going to have that as a backdrop. I want to see the players forming a backdrop behind you.
Even if I write it on a bit of paper and stick it on.
I don't care how ugly it is, as long as we can make it big enough so we know who's what. That'll do. All right. Fine.
Sounds good.
If you see the away dressing room at the SCG, we've got the traditional boards, as you know, at Lords and many grounds around the world. Where they've got the gold-plated writing, who scores centuries and fifers. Yeah. In the away dressing room, they started to write on a cupboard in pen and signed it. And that became the way that they did it. And they had the official boards, but they ended up doing it. And before you knew it, the whole door both sides was full. And they had to get a new cabinet in there. And the old doors have been placed against the wall and framed. And it's magnificent. It's the handwriting of the players after 5 first and century. So, Your handwritten will be pretty good. We'll definitely get that. That could be a very good backdrop for you.
For sure.
All right. Thanks, Chris, for your time. Thanks, everyone,
No
for
worries.
listening. Clearly, we're not over, guys. I've had a lot of people comment to me saying, "Oh, Norman, it's sad to see you go." I'm not going anywhere. Where am I going? I'm still here. Okay, so I'm not going anywhere. I'm Australian, yes, and India have finished their series having smacked us or thumped us or whatever word you want to use. The reality is I'm not going anywhere, nor was Chris. We've got a lot to talk about, in particular with Sri Lanka and England coming up, India and England later, and then even the South African series between Pakistan and Australia, and on we go. There'll be a lot more to talk about. So stay tuned on Eyes on Cricket with Norman Kochannek, with Chris and I. Take care.
See you guys.
Turn it off.